Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Line Stand Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Stone. And ever since the release of One Piece Chapter 1098, I've been doing hours, and I mean hours of research into Oda's greatest Easter egg in the manga to date. Now you might say, Dan, that's a bold claim. What the hell are you even talking about, and what Easter egg could this possibly be? Fair. I'm so glad you asked, viewer that I hope is watching, otherwise I am screaming into the void and talking to myself. Oh god. It's the cross in Bartholomew Kuma's church, guys. And okay, so, well, it's not the cross specifically, but specifically what's inside of the cross. See, those 9 circles are so crucial to the story of One Piece that it's almost baffling that we haven't ever spoken about its significance at large in the community today. In fact, I would go even as far as to say that this symbol tells us the overarching story of One Piece, the foreshadowing of Luffy's powers, Imu's powers, and possibly even the powers of the remaining Gorosei. So, if you want to take a deeper dive into Luffy, Imu, and the Gorosei, stick with me, and we'll explore it together. Now, like I said earlier, this is quite possibly Oda's greatest Easter egg and tool of foreshadowing in the One Piece manga. In my review of Chapter 1098, I mentioned that we'd seen the symbol once before, that it was featured in the Kozuki Mon meaning clan symbol in Japan. And while I was correct, it doesn't truly tell the complete story of this emblem. The truth is that we've seen this kind of symbol multiple times before, even as far back as Alabasta. We first see the symbol, as far as I could find, on Sanji's outfit in Alabasta, but we also see it on the flag of Alabasta itself, and on Luffy's sash on the cover of Chapter 175. And if we're looking chronologically, we also see it on Ace's dagger in Alabasta, because he did make a presence in Alabasta. But to be fair, it is much easier to recognize with his dagger by his gravestone on Sphinx Island. Moving on. We also see a slight variation of this diagram as a tattoo on Wiper in Skypiea, and it's later added to the Usopp exhibit in Skypiea. From there, we see another variation as a tattoo on King Neptune before we see the most recent interpretation with the red scabbards of Wano, Luffy's kimono in Wano, and now the cross in the southern Sorbet Kingdom. We also see a similar style on Blackbeard's and Kaido's respective Jolly Rogers, which is interesting to note because Kaido clearly has some knowledge of the history of the world that we've lost through the Void Century, and Joy Boy and Blackbeard might as well, given his ties to rocks that have yet to be revealed by Oda. So, Oda shows us this symbol time and time again right through the story, but what does it mean? Well, there are a few theories for us to explore, and it's important to note that Oda might not just stick with one of these, but may give multiple meanings to this symbol. So let's take a look. Now, the first theory is that this diagram represents the phases of the moon. This was introduced to me by YouTuber Sai in his chapter review of 1098, which initially got my gears turning. In fact, if you look at the diagram, it perfectly lines up with the diagram for the phases of the moon. If this is the case, then it could mean that Oda is using the symbol to represent the 8 centuries or phases of darkness that the world must go through before the dawn is to take place, which lines up perfectly with where we are in the story today. It also works thematically because in the present day, Imu and the Gorosei are looking to recreate the Great Cleansing that issued in the Void Century, attempting to restart the Circle of Darkness. And if you look again at the moon diagram, each new cycle starts with a new moon, which looks like a void. So this would be very poetic for Oda as well as thematically relevant, and I honestly would love to see it. This, however, feels more like a subtext rather than something that would be blatantly said in the story. And I believe that Oda has a much more direct meaning for the symbol. And so we could take a look at another theory. Another explanation that I do like is that it could represent the 8D families that were started possibly by Joy Boy, with sun god Nika at the center. If that's true, then I believe the purpose of the symbol is kind of already fulfilled, seeing as we do know we already know 8D families. Monkey, Marshall, Portgas, Jaguar, Gull, Trafalgar, Rocks, and most recently revealed, as of this Egghead Island arc, Nefeltari. So, with that being said, I think Oda has something much grander for us, and for us to understand it, we have to go into Japanese history and Hindu mythology. The most recent iteration of the diagram that Oda shows us is known in Japan as a Kuyomon. The Kuyomon is mostly popularized by the Hosokawa clan, one of the more powerful clans in Japan, that served as daimyo during the Ashikaga shogunate. The Kuyomon translates to 9 stars emblem in English and is actually borrowed from Hindu astrology in the form of the Navagraha. I'm just going to put this disclaimer out there, by the way. I'm not Hindu, nor am I Japanese, so if I butcher any of these pronunciations, bear with me, and please feel more than welcome to leave the proper pronunciations in my in my comment section. The only good Nazi is a grammar Nazi, and I am one. So I appreciate the correction, is what I'm trying to say. Let's talk about the Navagraha. The Navagraha are 9 heavenly celestial bodies and deities that influence human life on Earth according to Hindu mythology, and it is in the Navagraha that Oda hid the mysteries of Luffy, Imu, and the Gorosei. This is because the 9 bodies of the Navagraha are Surya, Chandra, Mangala, Buddha, Guru, Shukra, Shani, Rahu, and Ketu, which respectively translates to Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, and the 2 lunar nodes, the ascending lunar node and the descending lunar node. Now, let's ignore the nodes Rahu and Ketu for the moment. I think they're important, but we'll come back to them later. I believe that with the Kuyomon, Oda has shown us the strength and standing of each Gorosei member, as well as the powers they may have. So, let's discuss the one that I guess we already know, and also what I would believe based on this list to be the weakest first. Let's talk about St. J. Garcia Saturn. Now, like I said, Saturn will be a quick one, mostly because Oda has already revealed his powers. It seems to be consensus at this point that Saturn has the power of the Ushi Oni, a yokai from Japanese mythology. And according to yokai.com, because I am not Japanese and I do not know these stories growing up, a terror from Western Japan, the Ushi Oni is a class of monster that lives near water. The name literally means ox demon, and it refers to a number of monsters with bovine traits. Most Ushi Oni resemble an ox from the head up, with a demonic horror below. Despite their unique and varying morphology, all Ushi Oni share several characteristics, pointing to a common origin. They are exceedingly cruel and savage. They breathe toxic poison and eat humans. Now, comparing that to the Saturn and the Navagraha from an aesthetic perspective, which is what we'll be doing going forward, I believe it gives us insight into the full appearance of Saturn. A dark blue or black Ushi Oni, seeing as Saturn is described as dark blue or black in the Hindu Strotam mantras. With the reveal of Saturn, it leads me to believe that Oda will stick with the yokai theme for Imu and the Gorosei, and the yokai will have a traditionally bad story or bad energy in Japanese myths. So I don't think that, generally speaking, Oda will take a yokai that is good and mispurpose them for evil here, he will take a yokai that is traditionally understood to be evil in Japanese mythology and work with that. That being said, let's look at the one next in line, Venus. In the Hindu mantra, Venus is regarded as, quote, the one who shines like snow and jasmine, which is most blatantly reflected in his white kimono, I believe. Now, and with that description, it leads me to believe that the yokai most attributable, so that's 5 times fast, to Saint Ethan Baron Venus Jiro is the Shiro Unari, or the White Undulation. According to yokai myths, the Shiro Unari is traditionally a dragon born out of a kitchen towel that has been overused. And while that doesn't sound particularly terrifying, the dragon usually attacks its victims by wrapping its moldy and slimy body around them and even kills via strangulation. And so I believe that Oda will use this as a basis for Saint Venus Jiro, and maybe even allow him to infect and poison his victims. And next we have Jupiter. Jupiter, who is described as one who is like gold. And this is probably why Oda gave him blonde hair, you know, the Sanji uncle dude. I'll throw up a picture in post-editing. There we go. Keeping with the theme of gold, it seems like the yokai for Saint Jupiter is the Kina Kobo. Now, this yokai is described as having flabby yellow skin, sharp teeth, and a bright red tongue, and a large saucer-like eyes. But not much else is known about this yokai outside of its appearance, seeing as it doesn't have any folktales surrounding it. I think that this is a great opportunity for Oda to create a convincing story behind this yokai, especially since the yokai was first found in a picture scroll by Oda's ancestor, Oda Gocho, in 1832. So I'm thinking that this would be a very, very good opportunity for Oda to carry on the family legacy, and who knows, maybe in 200 or 300 years from now, because One Piece is probably going to live on as a story, I assume for that long, that this might just be the story that the Kina Kobo gets an actual legend, and maybe that gets passed down. Who knows? We'll see. I won't, but someone will. Next up, we got Mercury, who is typically depicted as green. Given the silhouettes that Oda showed us in the room, the only yokai that really matched with Mercury's position was the Baku. And the Baku is known as the eater of bad dreams and traditionally an enemy of evil yokai, which might sound like it might go against what I said earlier in terms of having bad yokai, but stick with me for just a second. So if Oda were to have a member of the Gorosei betray Imu, Saint Topman Mercury might be the best candidate, especially given the context that when Imu targeted Lelouchia, he seemingly objected to it due to the large population size. Now, if Oda doesn't decide to go that route, then we could see a second side of Baku. According to the myths, if Baku is hungry, after eating a nightmare, it will devour the hopes and dreams, also causing the person to live an empty life. So we might get to see an evil version of Baku that eats things like the hopes and dreams of its opponents. It's very, very, very similar to the effects of Perona's Devil Fruit, possibly leaving them without will or power to go on. Next on the roster, we have Mars, Saint Marcus Mars, whose other name in Hindu is Tunga, which means tall, and he's described as having a shining lightning whose color is like blood. Now again, going with the shape and silhouettes that Oda has given us made this somewhat easier to narrow down, but given the color of blood that he's described as having in the Hindu scrotum, as well as the position that Oda put him in, it looks like the Itsumade yokai is very, very fitting for St. Marcus Mars, as it's often depicted as blood red and feeds on the lamentations of the dying and the dead. And apparently it flies around when folks are dying, and it does nothing to alleviate the pain, but rather becomes more and more powerful with the more pain that's inflicted around its victims, and it I guess survives on that. So that looks like it might be a good fit for St. Marcus Mars. And finally, we have the Great Emu. And unlike the Gorosei members, I think that Emu will take after its namesake, kind of like Luffy, right? Earlier I mentioned that Luffy is representative of the sun. Luffy is actually the sun god. And so Luffy being the sun god means his powers are directly related to the body he's supposed to represent. And so in that vein, I believe that Emu's yokai should actually be related to the moon. I know that I've seen the theories, and I do respect them, that says Emu is actually supposed to be the Nireona, the water lady, the snake, and that's because Emu is of the house Nerona, which Oda revealed a couple of chapters ago. And I totally get that. But I think that if we're going to stick with those themes between Luffy and Emu being the sun and the moon, the light and the false light, because the moon doesn't necessarily represent darkness, it's a false light. Like the energy from the moon comes from the sun, technically, right? And so I believe that Emu's yokai should be related to the moon. With Chandra being described as white as snow, yogurt, and icebergs, yes, that is literally word for word, I think it's entirely possible that the yokai that will represent Emu is the Katsura Otoko. Now, the Katsura Otoko is an incomparably beautiful man that lives on the face of the moon. He spends his time pruning his moon garden and beckons towards the moon gazers in an attempt to kidnap their souls. Now, this works perfectly for Emu, because the first time that we're introduced to Emu, he's surrounded by ice, and in chapter 1086, right before he erases Lelouchia, he's found in his garden, surrounded by what looks like to be a Katsura tree, which is kind of what the Katsura Otoko spends a lot of his time doing, right? He takes time pruning his Katsura tree garden, and he's also surrounded by lilies, which is a flower that the moon god Chandra is typically depicted with. And so, like I said earlier, this power both practically and thematically works for Emu, and the vampiric nature of the Katsura Otoko may be even used to explain why he's immortal. That being said, when I was doing research for this, there is a much deeper rabbit hole, like a side rabbit hole that we could go down, because Nefeltari is an actual type of lily in Egypt, which is why, Lily might be tied to Emu and his whole history there. But if you're interested, I guess, in doing a deeper dive into that, y'all folks will let me know, and I'll spend some time doing it. But if you like this video, then please share and subscribe. I put a lot of work and a lot of hours into coming up with this theory, so I'm hoping it's well received. I've just made a couple of videos, so any interaction is really appreciated. Let me know what you think below. I also plan to do a section on Rahu and K2 and who I think represents, but I think I want to make that a separate video. So if this does well, I'll do a follow-up on Rahu and K2 and who I think that represents. So stay tuned. I would really, really appreciate it. All the support I could get on this. Please, like I said, like, share, subscribe, and until next time, I'm your host, Dan Stone, reminding you to sharpen your claws and stay in the hunt. See you guys soon. Take care.